Good to be with you. Thanks for joining me. Before I bring my guest on, I just want to talk to you a little bit about a big change in an upcoming announcement with the John Paul II Renewal Center. One of the reasons, about the main reason we're doing what we do is simple. We want to bring the gospel of love to families and especially to the young people, children, all the way up to their teens and into their 20s, young people. We're growing up today without any hope in a very twisted, distorted, toxic culture. Not telling you anything you don't know already, but they've been repeatedly lied to about the very basics concerning the meaning of marriage, the family, what authentic love is, the true meaning of sex and their sexuality, and so much more. This has left so many of them anxious, depressed, and even hopeless to the point of suicidal thoughts that they're having. We meet these young people all the time. How many lives, how many souls could be saved if we were not afraid to tell them the truth? The more the world deprives young people of what's true, good, and beautiful, the more earnestly they will yearn for it. Jason Everett, in a wonderful book called St. John the Great, His Five Loves, says the vacuum of modern secularism is actually a fragrant invitation, an invitation for young people to rediscover the sacred. We're finding that all the time. They're looking for something more. When you proclaim the truth to them and love them in the truth and declare the gospel, you find out that their hearts are yearning for something more. Their experience of life tells them something's wrong, but they don't know what it is. They get these gender ideologies pushed on them, thinking something's wrong with them, with their bodies, right? Their minds, their bodies, their souls don't line up together. They get confused. So who's gonna help them? All you have to do is somebody, people willing to proclaim the gospel to them, proclaim the truth to them. It's beautiful the way John Paul has given us the theology of the body, the vocabulary in order to speak to their young hearts. Having accepted this task to proclaim the truth of the gospel through the work and the lens of St. John Paul II's theology of the body, we hired a new director, someone as an executive director to take my position so that I can go out. The demands on our speaking, our time for speaking, recording, going out and presenting theology of the body, speaking to young people, speaking to old people. And we launched a new program, as everybody knows, called Love Ed, working with Colleen Kelly Mast, the author of Love Ed, along with St. Benedict Press, who put the books together. And it's called Love Ed. And let me just see if I can get. I should have put this up on something else, but anyways, Love Ed, and Love Ed is really a twofold step. It is a way for us to present to young people the theology and the science, what's happening behind, in their bodies, and also the theology, the love. What is love? We call it Love Ed, not sex ed, Love Ed. And then the second thing is so important. We bring the parents and the children together to do this together. We empower parents to give the talk, and to unpack this. Create it so that churches and parishes all over our country could effectively teach children about the beauty of love and sexuality within the content of our Christian faith. It's so beautiful. Dads bring their boys, moms bring their girls at different ages, two very important times, right when they're going into puberty, say about fifth grade. So fifth grade, dad brings his son, and we slowly unpack this through these 5 acts. It's so beautiful to see. And during the course of this hour and a half to 2 hours, there's a bond that develops between the dad and the son as they start to open up to each other. It's so beautiful to see. So that they no longer go to the culture. They no longer go to a teacher or somebody maybe they don't even know, or their peers asking questions about sexuality, about the meaning and purpose of their bodies, about all these things that they're seeing, and they can go to their parents now. And so we're creating a bond. So those two things again, bring the science and the theology together. Don't do them apart. Just give them the science. They have so many questions. Just tell them no. They have even more questions. Do it together and do it as a family. It's amazing things happen, right? So, anyways, David Avignone is our new executive director. He's coming on. He already started working with us. I'm going to be able to have more time now to go out and speak. And so feel free to reach out to us. If we weren't able to do it in the past, we'll have more time today. We're bringing on additional staff. With that said, too, please remember to support our apostolate. You'll find ways to do that in the show notes. And get ready now. I'm going to bring on John Bursch. John Bursch again wrote this book, Loving God's Children. If I'm a parent that's confused, I'm going to get this book as a handbook, The Church and Gender Ideology. Then I'm going to go push today's podcast out to everybody I know so that they know that there's answers out there, and then turn them on to Love Ed and say, let's get Love Ed into our parishes, into our churches, into our communities, so we could bring the family together and build up this domestic church, right? A little bit before I bring John on, John Bursch serves as Vice President of Appellate Advocacy for Alliance Defending Freedom, ADF. It's the largest public interest law firm in the world, defending religious liberty, free speech, parental rights, marriage, family, the right to life. John has argued 12 cases in the U.S. Supreme Court, including cases defending the Catholic Church's teaching on marriage, sexuality. He frequently speaks to groups, both religious and secular, about topics including marriage, human sexuality, the right to life, religious liberty. He's the married father of 5, fourth-degree Knight of Columbus, a 3-time past president of the Grand Rapids Legatus chapter, and a member of the Pro Partners Foundation Advisory Board. This is going to be a real treat for you. John not only knows the legal aspects, but he's out there on the front line speaking about this stuff. I think you're going to find this interview with John very helpful. So buckle up and get ready for today's episode. Welcome to the Become Who You Are podcast, a production of the John Paul II Renewal Center. I'm Jack Riggard, your host. Thanks for joining us today. I'm glad to be back with John Bursch, who wrote Loving God's Children, the Church and Gender Ideologies, that I believe is going to become a handbook of sorts for parents, pastors, and teachers trying to make sense of the gender ideologies that have become so pervasive in our culture today. I want to read just a little bit from Father Robert Spitzer, who's a genius of sorts. And he said this is to date the most comprehensive popular treatment available of the Catholic position on gender ideology. John Bursch has provided an excellent guidebook, not only for clergy, teachers, medical specialists, and politicians, but also for the average Catholic who is increasingly pressured to conform to the medically, psychologically, and spiritually damaging popular cultural agenda. And he as always, Robert Spitzer wrote a lot there, and he says a lot in a few words there, John. So welcome to the show. Thank you so much. Thanks for writing this book. I'm very excited to have you on to talk about these things.
Thank you. I'm delighted to be here to discuss them.
So let me just add this. We already went over your bio, but you serve as the Vice President of Appellate Advocacy for Alliance Defending Freedom, the largest public interest law firm in the world defending religious freedom, liberty, free speech, parental rights, marriage, the family. Another incredible thing, you've argued 12 cases in the U.S. Supreme Court. I want to ask you just a little about that. Fourth-degree Knight, a 3-time past president of the Grand Rapids Legatus chapter, a father of 5, a member of the Pro-Life Foundation Advisory Board. So let me ask you 2 things to get started, John. And thank you again for coming. With everything that you're doing, what was the impetus to really what you saw out there that you said, I got to write this book and I got to get this down? And then if you could just touch on us for us, what is it like to argue cases? I mean, not only 1, but 12 cases in the Supreme Court. I find that outstanding. I'm not a lawyer, so I couldn't even imagine what that's like.
Well, thank you. I'll start with the second question first, because I think the first one will naturally lead into our discussion about.
Thank you.
Arguing in the U.S. Supreme Court is always a privilege. You walk in and the whole proceeding is just draped with history and tradition. There's those couple of moments before the justices come out, and it's kind of a silent buzz in the courtroom, and everybody is on edge. And then there's a buzzer, and the gavel starts to be hit, and then the red curtains part, and then the justices kind of magically appear. And it's really an honor to be there, but also an intellectually rigorous jousting process. In a Supreme Court argument, on average, the justices ask about 100 questions per hour.
Oh.
So that's more than 1 question per minute. And so unlike this format, where you give me some space to say my piece, I may only have 10 to 25 seconds to get an answer out, and then I'm being interrupted again. So you really need to know your stuff. And it's just really unbelievable to me, thinking about where my legal career started, that I get to be there litigating cases today involving the most important issues to Catholics in the Catholic Church, whether that be gender ideology or pro-life positions. We just had two Supreme Court arguments in March and April involving abortion issues. It's just amazing. And so God has really blessed me with my work. And it's the work that was really the genesis for the book.
Mm,
The primary areas outside of the life issues that I work on at ADF are free speech and religious liberty, and to a lesser extent, parental rights. And starting about 5 years or so ago, I saw a shift in the docket where gender ideology issues began to take up almost all of the space in each one of those buckets. So, for example, in the free speech space, we were seeing employers, particularly public employers, who were compelling their employees to use preferred pronouns, or not to speak out publicly about their religious views on gender ideology. In the religious liberty space, we were seeing increasing attempts to force religious organizations to hire transgender individuals, even if that
hmm.
violated their deeply held faith beliefs, or to include coverage for transgender surgeries, or other transgender care, cross-sex hormones, puberty blockers, things like that in their policies. We started to see it in the sports landscape, where boys who identified as girls were winning all kinds of sports contests and either moving women off of the podium or excluding them from conference and state championship meets altogether because they couldn't beat the boys. We saw it in the parental rights landscape, where schools
Mm,
were, public schools in particular, counselors and teachers were helping transition kids at school and intentionally keeping it a secret from their parents. And then more recently, even refusing to allow individuals and families to become adoptive parents and foster care parents,
yeah.
unless they were willing to sign on to the LGBT agenda in all of its colors, including promising ahead of time that they would help their kid transition. So, I was learning about all the legal issues, but as a Catholic, it was important for me that I understood where the church was coming from on all these things too. And so I began to study, and of course, the theology of the body immediately had a huge impact on that. And I started giving presentations in churches and at Catholic
Mm,
conferences and things like that. And the next thing you know, I had people clamoring for me to write a book. And so I
yeah.
carved time out of my schedule to do that, and this was the result.
Well, fantastic. I mean, when you think about the light you're shining on this from your background as an attorney and someone that again has been up arguing cases at the Supreme Court level about all these things we're reading about all the time, and then you write an accessible book like this that I think will put some hearts to ease right here. You're really, it's the confidence that a parent has, right, to be able to stand up and advocate for for their children. I'll give you a little example, John. I was doing this presentation we call Stolen Innocence, which is not a religious presentation. It's a community awareness presentation, just showing what happens to children when they're exposed to pornography in an early stage of their life. Before they're in, they're in this stage of innocence. It's such beautiful time for them to learn and discover life, what that does to them. And all we were doing is exposing the books that were in their elementary schools and in their high schools, actual books. And so we were after that presentation. Some people some activists were in there. Like any large audience, you're going to have an activist or two. They heard about this and they came on purpose. We could identify them as they walked in. Well, anyways, they left and they complained to the library and they canceled our future meetings. They canceled us and they took away our ability to we were banned from the library basically. And so we asked them why. We wrote a letter, asked them why, and because I said we're exposing, telling parents about exposing kids to pornography. But here's why I'm asking this. I find over and over again that they wrap these gender ideologies as kind of a veneer, almost as a cover, and then underneath that, there's so much pornography and so many things. And what we found through the John Paul II Renewal Center that I'm associated with, John, is that as we were speaking to children, young children, elementary, about, theology of the body and chastity talks. There was an anxiety and a depression there, that was palpable, and they wanted to talk about this. They were so confused, and you could see what was happening to them. I mean, there's a real harmful effect on these children, and again, I'll throw it back in your court. But it's amazing how they want to push you back right now. And there's something evil about all this, John, but I'll let you take it where you want right now.
Yeah, well, certainly there's a crisis. I would even say a pandemic when
Mm,
it comes to our young people. And
yes.
and it starts with the schools. California has a curriculum now where they teach gender ideology beginning in kindergarten. So 5-year-olds are asked in class to say what their gender expression is and things like that.
Yeah.
So it's certainly starting there, and the books that you were highlighting in the library, they're unbelievable. But where the infestation, I think, is the worst, where it's really toxic, is with the smartphones and the social media.
Hmm.
And every Catholic parent needs to seriously consider
Hmm.
whether their child even needs a smartphone before age 16, and whether they've got access to a computer that the parents don't supervise, whether they have social media accounts. In our family, we didn't allow those until the kids turned 18 and were going to college. And it's because there is a pervasive amount of content on TikTok and on Instagram and other places that are all pushing the LGBT agenda generally,
Hmm.
but the trans agenda in particular. And then it doesn't even stop with the social media, because if you're not careful, the regular media that your kids consume will have it too. As I talk about in the book, just a couple of years ago, during this month, June, which is officially Pride Month in the United
Hmm.
States, there was
Hmm.
an episode on Blues Clues. And if you're not a parent with a young child, you don't know that Blues Clues is kind of this combination cartoon and live action show that's targeted for 3, 4, and 5-year-olds. And so 20 years ago, when our kids were little, sometimes we let them watch Blues Clues. So 3 years ago in June, during Pride Month, they had a Pride parade on Blues Clues, and every single float in the parade, it was the ants go marching one by one was the tune. Each float highlighted a different aspect of LGBT culture. And one of the floats, there was a family of beavers, and there was a
Hmm.
young girl beaver who had tape over her breasts where they had been removed.
Hmm.
She had had a mastectomy. And in case there was any doubt about that, someone asked the show's producers, were you really showing kids a young girl who had had her breasts removed to promote gender ideology? And they said yes. So if you were throwing a load of laundry in, or you were making dinner and your 4-year-old was watching Blues Clues, that was the propaganda that they were being exposed to. And so as parents, it's crucial that we know what these issues are about, and that we be cognizant of the way culture is trying to influence our kids, because at the very youngest ages possible, they're being influenced in the worst possible ways to adopt transgender mentalities.
Would you say, and I don't want to get you in the weeds here on this, because there's so many good things in this book that are going to help parents, but would you say that the people that are pushing this on so many levels, look at, I know young people, I meet them all the time that are actually struggling with with this gender confusion, right? And same-sex attraction, all these different things. But that's a different issue, I think, compared to a lot of these people, like you said, that are producing these shows, the people in power, in our government, and also in corporations, even in some churches now that have. We just heard about the United Methodist Church, going, adopting a LGBTQ platform. Do they really believe in these gender ideologies? You mentioned the school systems, and we're in Illinois, so this is the belly of the beast too here. And they're pushing the national sex ed standards, comprehensive sex ed standards, some people call them, on our kids, and doing exactly what you said at a very early age, exposing them, and asking them questions about their gender in kindergarten already, and sometimes even preschool. The firms, and I won't name those because you're an attorney and I don't want you to have to answer too many questions here on this thing and get you into any more litigation than you need to. But these firms, so often, I'm when I'm speaking to parents and they're asking me questions, I don't think these corporations, and not everybody in the government believes in all these ideologies, but there's something nefarious behind that. Do you want to comment on that at all, or would you rather stay away from
Oh, no,
that? Is that
I'm
too
happy
big
to
of a?
comment on that.
Yeah, thank you.
And I would put that in a couple of different buckets. First, in the first bucket, and these are going to be the people who are most into believing the truth of gender ideology, are parents who have already allowed their kids to transition.
Mm-hmm.
Because if they would ever wake up and acknowledge the scientific and philosophical truth about the human body, they would have to admit that they allowed the worst possible thing to happen to their child, to
Yes.
mutilate their sexual organs. And
Yes.
so, no matter what evidence you present them with, they're going to have a very difficult time walking away from that belief that they have. So that's one bucket. In another bucket, you've got the power players who make money and get power and influence from pushing these issues. And that's the major corporations. There's one political party that is really pushing these issues right now. It happens to control the White House. So that's a whole nother bucket. And then you have this third bucket, and I think it's the biggest one. And these are the school boards and the teachers and others who are sold on this ideology. And I think it's because they don't know any better. When they
Mm-hmm.
go to a public schools conference, what they're told is you have to have these policies affirming kids, and you have to keep it a secret from the parents if you don't think that they're going to go along, because that's child abuse and neglect. And the driving thing that they're being told is that if you don't affirm and help these kids transition, they'll commit suicide and die. And as I hope we'll talk about, in detail, the science shows that's not true, that that's a
Mm-hmm.
lie. But that lie is the one that's being pushed. And unless you have someone exposed to the kind of information that's in the book that shows that there's another story to this, and in fact, the best medical evidence in the world runs contrary to the messages that are being sold to the teachers and the corporate ad executives and things like that, people just don't know any better. And so, as Catholics, I mean, it's just as true for gender ideology as it is for any other teaching of the Catholic Church, including the existence of Jesus Christ himself. You have to be catechized first, and then you have to go into the world and have the courage to proclaim that message to other people. And the more that we do that, the more we're going to be able to push back on this tide.
Yeah. And when we do that, when you say we need to push back, or we have to have the knowledge and the information and the actual heart to push back, there's a reason for this, because families are being destroyed. If people are listening and say, why should we even push back on this? Which I think our audience is past that, John. But there are people out there, and you say, because people are getting hurt. We at the John Paul II Renewal Center, we have we have the breadth that we've been speaking to young people too, while we're out speaking to older people about these issues. So we see the damage that's being done, and of course we see the damage being done in marriages and families, and the divisive nature of these ideologies to pull parents and kids away from each other. You start out in the book laying this foundation so well. I thought about a quote from Saint Teresa Benedicta when John Paul II had his canonization for Edith Stein, and he quoted her. And she was going to go to the gas chamber at some point. But she was a Jewish convert to Catholicism. She was a seeker. A philosopher, a seeker. She gets to the point, and before she goes to the gas chamber, she says, do not accept anything as the truth if it lacks love, and do not accept anything as love which lacks the truth. One without the other becomes a destructive lie. And I think that's a summation of a foundation for your book, because you make this so clear. You talk about objective truth. What is the truth? Can you really become a man or a woman? I mean, that's a good question to start with, right? What is the truth? And then you add in here, and this is Catholic teaching, right? Do it in love. Do it in love, knowing that we came into a broken world. We're all broken people. We're all sinners, and we're all know that at the end of the day, let's talk about the truth and let's do it in love, right? And that's the only way to handle this. And then, so if you could speak on those two things, the objective truth, the importance of that, and because we're setting a base, right, underneath us. Because if we don't do that, John, it just becomes all these opinions floating around. You don't get anywhere if you don't start with the truth, if you don't do it in love. And then maybe you can go into the exactly what we're talking about. What does the science really say about all this, so we have some real knowledge and some meat to that?
Well, I'm always delighted to start with truth and love,
Yeah,
because
thank
those
you.
are two concepts that have just been abandoned by modern culture. And when I sat down to write the book, Initially I'm thinking, okay, I'm going to jump right into gender ideology, what it is and what the church has to say about it, and realize that unless we have a common understanding of what truth and love are, you can't
Yes.
even have a discussion about the big questions in life. What is a man and a woman? What is the sex nature of the human body for? What is the meaning of life, and is it worth protecting? What does it mean to have human dignity? You can't ask those questions unless you understand truth and love. So just briefly, in our modern culture, among young people in particular, they've rejected any notion of an objective truth. For our teenagers and our college students, about 90% of them, they ascribe to moral relativism, where there is no objective truth. What's true for you
Mhm.
is true for you. What's true for me is true for me. And it reduces everything to just a matter of opinion, because we can't ever agree on anything that's universally true for everyone. And modern Americans love this kind of relativism because it's very non-judgmental. So if I'm at work and there's someone else who's spouting a pro-abortion ideology, I don't need to confront them because, well, protecting life is a truth for me. It doesn't have to be for them. And so I don't need to engage in that conversation. So it's a polite way to step out and say, I'm not going to engage. But we all know that there is an objective truth. It's created by God, and He gave us the intellect so that we can rationalize what that truth is. And the church has been doing that for 2,000 years, starting with the words of Jesus, but using everything in the Bible to reveal truths about the human person. And, theology of the body, case in point there. And so we have to agree that there is a truth that can be discerned before we start the conversation. Love is a concept that's even more perverted in modern culture. From
Mhm.
movies and TV shows and novels, this notion that love is just a feeling is pervasive. Everyone thinks that it's how I feel. If you've ever watched one of those dating shows, well, do I have a connection with someone? How do they make
Mhm.
me feel? I feel really good when I'm with them. This must
Mhm.
be love. And that's not love at all. The Catholic Church and the Catechism teaches us that love is willing the good of the other. So it's not a feeling, it's an action, and we choose to do it. And it's one that's not tied to what the other person wants. It's tied to what's best for them. And as parents, we intuitively understand this, putting the love and the truth together. If my child wants to touch a hot stove and they really want to do it, they say, it's going to make me so happy to do that. We still won't let them because, one, we know an objective truth that a hot stove will burn them and severely hurt them. And two, because we want what's best for them, we'll deny them the one thing that they desire and ask for the most, because that's what's best for them. That's what keeps them safe. That's what protects them. And so as we enter into these conversations with families and school boards and employers about gender ideology, we always need to approach it with both of those things. What's willing the best for others, but also what does the objective truth have to say about this subject? And so if we get those right, then everything else can flow from that.
Yes, that's beautiful. Just the thought came to my mind as you're saying this. I walked in just to show people how practical of what you just said is. We do these high school retreats, and usually around sophomore year. And so this is a group of, we start out, it's a co-ed group, a fairly large group. And I just threw out a couple icebreakers. I come in with a team, some younger people, and we come in with a team, and I just threw out a couple icebreakers, and a young girl raises her hand, and I said, "Yes, young lady," and she said, "Call me they." I mean, right off the bat, and I go, "Okay, Holy Spirit, you want to start this thing early, don't you?" And I looked over at her, and she looked very sincere. This a sincere girl. And I said, "Why do you want me to call you they?" And just to cut kind of to the chase, she said, "Some days I wake up like this." She's gender neutral, and so non-binary, et cetera, et cetera. She said, but she said, "Some days I wake up feeling, you get back to your feeling like a boy. Some days I feel like a girl." And I just stopped her for a second, and I said, "I'm a simple guy." I said, "I just walked in. I don't even know your names. Now I got to learn all your pronouns." I said, "It's going to be too much for me. So just for now, this is a Catholic school now, right? They don't let me in the public schools." I said, "Just for now, consider this. And if you don't like it, we'll go to plan B. Just for now, can I call you a beloved child of God?" And she thought about it just for a second, and then she nodded her head. And I pointed to the person next to her. I said, "How about you? Can I call you a beloved child of God?" And then I picked on a couple more, and I said, "Me too. We all have a common heritage. We're all brothers and sisters in this room. So let's take a deep breath, And just for now, let's go beneath the surface. And this is my point being this. She reminded me, and I told her some diving stories. I'm a diver, and I said, we all live in this moral relativism. And what happens to your hearts, young people, and old, all of us, I said, we get bobbled around by the spirit of the age. And it's not until you go deep, right? So I said, why don't we all just go into prayer? I said, do you guys just want to settle down a little bit and get rid of some of that anxiety and blah, blah, blah? And they all said yes. I had no problem with that. I mean, they all closed their eyes. We took it down to prayer, John. It was the most beautiful thing. And by the end of this retreat, it was unbelievable the change that came over that girl because nobody had explained what you're talking about. It gave them the truth in love and loved them in the truth. So those words that you said were so important because we know this as human beings, don't we, John? In our hearts. Our hearts were created for the truth. And we wonder, why do we have to speak the truth? Well, because we're much better off in our own lives when we do that, right?
Absolutely. And that girl is the perfect example.
Mm-hmm.
What you did, which was so beautiful, is that you didn't immediately jump all over her and say, well, I can't call you they, you're a she. Instead, you asked a question and you
Yes.
started a dialogue. You accompanied her, and then you brought her back to her identity as a daughter of Christ. And
Yes.
if we can get that portion of our identity right, I'm not non-binary, I'm not transgender, I'm not gay, I'm not a smoker, I'm not a pornography consumer.
Mm.
None of those defines who I am. Those are
Mm-hmm.
merely actions that I may have chosen in the past, but I'm free to choose something else because my identity is as a son or daughter of Christ. Once you get that, then we can have all kinds of conversations because the foundation has been laid.
Yeah, and that exactly. And I want to make it so practical for people listening, John, is that once we moved away from feelings as love, that love can't be reduced to a feeling and then further reduced to sex, right? That's how our kids are taught.
Mm-hmm.
And so once they realized, wow, yeah, love has feelings. John Paul would talk about, this raw material for love. Yeah, it might be love. It might be the raw material for love, but it's not love yet. You don't even know the person, right? And then what do? We sexualize these things. And these kids are taught to do this, right? And
Absolutely.
so when you're taught to sexualize it, John Paul said it, and it's just so true. We sabotage our chance to actually find authentic love. We sabotage it. So these young girls, these young boys, do you really seek true authentic love, right? Or, are you just using one another? And let's just speak the truth here. And I'll tell you what, those conversations are very productive. And your book, again, it gives the parents the confidence and the vocabulary to speak that, John.
And I want to pick up on your
Uh-huh.
sabotage point real quick
Yes,
because early on you were talking about the pornography discussion that you were having with folks at the library, and
yes.
really the pornography and the gender ideology are of a piece when it comes to sabotaging true love for our kids.
Mm,
We know that when the kids get sucked into pornography and masturbation, that it's a turning inward, it's a selfishness that prevents you from being able to turn outward and truly love another
yes,
person. It's
yes.
sabotaging their ability to love. And it's the same thing with the gender ideology. Physically,
Mm,
obviously, if you're taking cross-sex hormones and then you have the surgery, you lose your sexual function and your reproductive capacity. So to the extent that you ever want to engage in the sexual act with a future spouse, you're preventing yourself from doing that. You're sabotaging your body. But even from an emotional, personal state, when you're broadcasting to the world an identity that doesn't represent who you truly are, that is just instead your subjective choice about what you want to portray, then that sabotages your ability to have loving, meaningful relationships with other people. And Pope Francis has talked about this beautifully in this very context, where he said, when we don't live out who we are authentically, being true to who God made us to be and accepting that gift, that we completely rupture our ability to enter into genuine relationships with other people. And so, like many of our modern ideologies, all of these sabotage our ability to engage in the type of relationships that we really want, the kind that God inscribed on our heart and that He wants us to have for our everlasting happiness.
yes, that's so beautiful. And if we want to just bring out maybe just this point, we're created imago Dei. We're created in the image and likeness of God. I think that goes over so many people's heads. But a tiny little reflection of that, what do we know just very quickly of the Trinity? The Father who pours himself out into the Son, and the Son receives that. And it's so beautiful and profound. It comes out in the form of a person, right? We call that person the Holy Spirit. When I was first got this, John, my wife was delivering our first child many years ago, and reflecting on it later on through John Paul's lens of his theology of the body. And I said, whoa, when they handed me that child, I said 9 months before that, my wife and I, right? I poured my love out to my wife. My wife received that love, and it was so beautiful and profound that it came out in the form of this person. We call this person a Jessica, a child. And this is the tiny created reflection, right, of Trinitarian love. The love that we were created to bring into this world and make visible, we do it through our bodies. So I'm just reiterating what you said, maybe from just another angle. You said it so well, and just now, just a little visual on that, that we were actually created to bring love into the world. And if we don't do that, it doesn't get in, does it? And the opposite of love, John Paul would say, is not hatred. At least it's not initially. It's using somebody. So instead of pouring yourself out, I'm grasping and taking. It's called lust, right? Selfishness.
Right?
You already said all those things. And this is why what we're talking about is so important, isn't it? We're fulfilling the very meaning of our lives and our existence. Who are people of love, but love and the truth.
Absolutely. And I love the way that you put that because when we talk about theology of the body, theology
Mm,
being learning more about God,
yes.
it's that very model that you were talking about, a man and his wife coming together in a sacramental marriage and giving everything of themselves, even their
Mm,
reproductive capacity. From that, a new person is created. Yeah, that's an icon of the Trinity itself. That's how we were designed. That's the call that we have, and we find our greatest fulfillment when we are able to participate with God in the co-creation of new life. It's absolutely astounding, and yet all of this gender ideology that's being pushed on young people across our country cuts off the ability for any of that to happen right at the start. Because without the complementariness of male and female bodies, you can't have that exchange of love that you and Pope John Paul II talk so beautifully about.
yes, yes. Well, let's move on. And I would love to stay there for another hour and a half with you, but I know because of time, I want to just move into what is the science on this? What is the actual fact on this? Because I think this is something that gets back to the truth. What is the truth? When we tell young people, John, that they really can't transition, like you said, those parents earlier, eh, you know, we hear about suicide. If I don't do it, it's going to be suicidal. But you point out in the book, and the psychologists and the psychiatrists that I speak to, they'll say the same thing. They'll say, Jack, the suicidal rates don't go down after these transitions. And they say the sad thing is, at least before you had an intact body, a little person's body intact, right? Even though they were confused, they were intact. Now you've irreparably in many cases put them on puberty blockers and cross-sex hormones and then mutilated their bodies. You've actually rendered them sterile in some cases, but certainly you've changed their actual physiology. And so you bring out the science so well in this book, and also the truth on that. So maybe we could touch on that a little bit.
Yeah, I'd love to, because this is what people need to understand to rebut the lie that if we don't affirm, kids will kill themselves. And something that's important to understand up front is that there is a high suicide rate for kids who have diagnosed gender dysphoria. And I
Yes.
want to separate into two camps, kind of the young person gender ideology movement. In one camp, you really have more of a social movement where kids are looking for friendship and positive affirmation and things like that. And so even though they don't have clinical dysphoria, they're choosing a lifestyle that they think will make them happy.
And they're
Their
looking for a
suicide,
way to fit in, right? I mean, they're looking for a
exactly.
place to fit in.
I don't know about you, but I myself and none of my family members or any person I've ever met made it through puberty without some feelings of loneliness and
Oh
discomfort
my
about the
gosh,
body.
yes.
That's a natural
Yes.
part of growing up,
Yes, it
and
is.
this is the quick fix. So
And
those
what
camps,
and let's stop there just 1 second, John, because
yeah,
what you're saying, what's so important for parents to understand is that you need to talk to your little girls and little boys as they're going through puberty. that your body is changing and you will be uncomfortable and you will feel lonely and confused at times. And if you leave them, if you don't do this, if we don't present them with the truth about that, they think their change is abnormal because they hear in the school, right?
Right?
In these national sex ed standards, if you're uncomfortable with your body, and who isn't, to your point, at puberty, right? I was. And if nobody explains this to you, you think, well, maybe I am in the wrong body. And see, you
Exactly.
could see a little innocent person being taken, right? Thrown to the wolves out there in this culture. I almost smile. I do smile because it's so nuts that I almost sometimes I got to smile, John, just to get through the day on some of this stuff, right? But what we're doing makes me feel so good because you're shedding light on all these issues. It's beautiful.
Yeah. So back to the science then. So kind of leaving the social group aside, there are a number of young people who actually have diagnosable gender dysphoria.
Yes.
That you can go to a psychologist, and they have this intense feeling that they're not born in the right body. Now, this sounds maybe foreign concept to many people, but there are lots of dysphorias, and this isn't the only one. The most common one that many people have had at least a family member experience has to do with anorexia,
Yeah,
where they're
my youngest daughter had
yeah,
anorexia.
exactly. The many families have struggled with this.
Hmm.
And so, as you know, hopefully your listeners know, that's where someone has that same type of dysphoria, this disconnection that their body is too fat, when that's not the objective truth.
Yeah.
And so they'll do anything that they can to try to get thinner, even though it hurts them. And at one point, going back to the importance of dealing with this issue with love and compassion, and truth, you would never tell your anorexic daughter, yeah, if you feel that you're too fat, you should eat less. And we'll even pay for the surgery to reduce your stomach size so that you'll eat less. That would be the most cruel, horrible thing that you could do.
Yeah.
No, instead, what we want to do is help them align their mind with the objective truth of their body. So these kids who are experiencing the gender dysphoria, they do have a suicide rate that's about 12 times higher than the general population. They need love, compassion, counseling, certainly, but accompaniment at every step of the way. We have to take that seriously. We can't just push it to the side as though that's something that's going to go away, because
Yes.
it needs to be treated just like anorexia needs to be treated. But
Yes.
the medical evidence shows, best long-term studies in the world, that for those who have gone through a complete transition, so they had the surgery, that they have a suicide rate that's 19 times the general population. Higher rates of suicidal death, higher rates of medical problems across the board because of the transition, but also higher incidences of mental health problems.
Mm.
And so affirming and a transition is not a panacea. And so what we see in Europe, where a lot of this care, if you want to call it that, put that in air quotes, was pioneered much earlier than the United States, is that they're all pulling back. UK, Finland, Sweden, Denmark, they're closing down the gender transformation clinics
Yeah.
because not only is the surgery harmful, but the cross-sex hormones and the puberty blockers are harmful for them too. And my book was published last fall, and almost every month since then, there's been a new study recognizing how harmful all of these treatments are for young people. That the puberty blockers cause all kinds of physical difficulties. The doctors in the United States will say, well, it's just a pause button. You can always unpause it later. That's not true.
It's
It'll
not
lead to
true.
loss of bone density, muscular developmental problems, psychosexual problems, as well as problems with sexual physical development, all those things. The cross-sex hormones, it's even worse, including heart issues and other mental health problems. So sometimes a Catholic will say to me, well, shouldn't I at least use the preferred pronoun, like that young woman who was asking you to call her they
Yeah.
at your presentation? Well, even the science at the outset shows us that roughly 80 to 95% of kids who have clinical diagnosed dysphoria will naturally desist and align their mind with their bodies if they're just left on their own.
Say
But
that again, John. Say, because people need to hear this. This is so important. If we just walk with them, right?
yes,
Talk with them. Walk. It's called basically talk therapy,
it
and
is.
yeah, and reiterate what you just said about the amount of kids that if you walk with them, maybe some counseling, et cetera, from somebody that actually is there and loves them in the truth, Go through that stat again, will you, please?
80 to 95% of them will desist and align their mind with their body. But of the kids that we affirm, we start using the pronouns. We allow them to use the opposite sex bathroom. We allow them to dress as the opposite sex. Nearly 100% of them will then go on to have one of these really destructive medical interventions. So even at the very outset, when you're asked, will you call me they, or, boy, will you call me she? You're setting them down a path. There's a fork in the road there. And
Hmm.
one is likely to lead to no problems, and the rest of their life they'll be able to carry on just like everybody else. And the other, a lifetime of medical intervention, hardship, high suicide rates, mental health problems. So even at the get-go, if we want to love in truth, we cannot accept the affirmation. We just can't, because it's condemning our kids.
So yeah, so that brings up a great point that we get all the time, and I get it from teachers too, John. Teachers in public schools who are Catholic, who are against these ideologies, right? There's less and less of those, but they're still there. And they'll bring it up, that the school said that they have to use, a pronoun. If a child, wants them to use a preferred pronoun, that they are tasked to use this, and they don't want to do that. And they say, because we think we're going to harm those children if we do. Is there an answer for those? I mean, there's a lot of things going on there, right? With do I need the job? What's going to happen? Do I do? Because people actually get fired over this kind of stuff. But on the other hand, let's just focus more on say a parent relationship with the child. Maybe even would be a better analogy. Should I use that pronoun? And or like this child, that this young person that confronted me right away with this answer in this question. What would be the harm then if I just went along with the pronoun? And and everybody I talk to says the same thing that you do. The psychologist, the psychiatrist. When a young person adopts or assumes this identity, they tend to live out of that identity, right? That label that
Right.
we put on them, and that puts them down that path, right? And so I'm going to throw this back in your hand. What's the best way for parents, teachers? Is there a best way to handle it? And how would you do it? How would you do it yourself?
Yeah, well, the very first thing I would do is pray for the guidance
Yes,
of the Holy Spirit, because this all
yes,
has to be grounded
yes.
in our faith, or we know that we fail when we try to do things without God's help. The next thing I would do is I would sit down with that child and I would start asking them questions. Well, why is it, say it's a young boy, that you say that you're a girl, and start to explore that. And as you ask questions, parts of that story will start to not make
Mm,
sense, hopefully to them, but certainly to you. So, well, I like to play with dolls, and I like dance and things like that. So I must be a girl. Well, I know lots of boys that like dance and like
mhm.
to play with dolls, but they're still boys. So why do you think that because you like those things, you're a girl? Well, I just feel like that. Well, if you felt other things, does that necessarily make those feelings true? I mean, what if you felt that you were a tree, or you were a horse, or
Wow,
that you
wow.
were President Biden? Would those feelings make you those things? Well, no. And well, so how about this feeling that you're a girl? Do you know what it feels like to be a girl? Well, not really. I talk to my friends sometimes, and they like these girly things. Yeah, but you've never actually been inside a girl. So then you start talking about some body stuff. What do you think that would do to your body if we changed it so it looked like a girl? Do you think that would have any implications? So these questions cause them to start thinking about things. And then it's so critical that as quickly as possible, you get them into a good Orthodox Catholic counselor. Because if they're experiencing dysphoria, this is going to be a long journey, just like it is for your daughter with anorexia. That's not a one-time conversation. That's a
No,
years
it's
long
not.
process, sometimes a lifelong process. And you need to have a counselor who's in your corner, who's going to continue to help them work through these issues and talk about them from the church's perspective, not from a culture perspective. And so that's how we have to approach these kids.
Yeah, that was just outstanding advice. And I'm just going to reiterate that, right? Pray first, And really, the Holy Spirit, you're going to find out that the Holy Spirit is real when you start, pondering, how am I going to respond? And that's the Socratic method again. Just don't forget to ask questions, right? Because we're trying to respond without knowing. There's so many young people out there that have been exposed to pornography that you don't know about, that have maybe even been sexually abused in some way or another. We don't know about that. Sometimes these kids are crying for help, aren't they, John? And when you're asking questions like that, we're going to learn, and we're going to be able to walk with them without pushing back on them, without pushing them away from you. That's just such good advice you just gave. John, we're going to start to unwind here, because I know as an attorney, you've got a million things to do. But as we're going out here, give us some contact information. I'll put the links in where they can buy the book. Anything else? Any other links you want in there? Any other ways that if somebody had a question or wanted to reach out? I mean, it's you can bill them by the hour, right? But do you have anything like that, or is it better just, hey, buy the book, take a look at that, and you tell us where you want us to go with that?
Yeah, absolutely. In the end, I'm a lawyer and not a counselor. And so if you're
Yes.
having an issue in your family, and talk to your priest and get a reputable counselor in your area. I'm not the one who's going to be
Yes.
best at helping a child through this process, although I can give you a lot of tools to get started. The book is available through all the major booksellers, but we prefer that you go to Sophia Institute Press. So those dollars go to a wonderful Catholic publisher instead of to Amazon, which is promoting all the books on the other side of this issue. And in the back of the book, there are a lot of resources that I recommend for parents in particular. One is the Person and Identity Project that Mary
Excellent.
Hassel Rice has started. It's an
Excellent.
excellent resource for all these things, and actually has links to Catholic counseling associations to help you find that counselor if you need it, as well as copies of all the studies that I reference in the book and additional ones besides, and just general questions and answers and things like that. So that's an excellent resource. Another book that I recommend is Ryan Anderson's When Harry Became Sally. It was one of the very first books to address this topic. It's not explicitly Catholic like my book is, although Ryan Anderson is a devout Catholic author. But it talks about it kind of from a philosophical perspective that's very helpful. I also recommend many in the book, many statements from bishops across the United States who have bravely spoken out on this issue. And so I would check your diocesan website and see if your bishop has a statement about gender ideology. Many bishops not only will lay down the rules for their Catholic schools, for example, no using pronouns that don't align with someone's natal sex, can't be on the opposite sex sports team or in their locker room or their shower or their bathroom. But they'll also talk about human anthropology in really beautiful, winsome ways. So I highly recommend that. And there's more of those coming out all the time.
Yeah.
And
And
then
and let me just
lastly,
add, John, before you add that last one, let me just add that you have those bishops, so many of them footnoted so well in here with their documents. So as they go through this book, as they find those, as they're following the book, you will find those sources, and they're excellent sources that you put in here. So thank you again for that.
yeah, and those references were critically important to me because I wanted people to understand that I'm not just making this up, that the
Mhm.
church has already spoken beautifully about
Oh
all
yeah.
these things. And I'm just
Yes.
putting it into a package where you can access all of it easily. And that's why I wanted to get the imprimatur from my bishop, which we were able to do, that this is all consistent with church teaching so that a Catholic doesn't pick up the book and have to wonder, well, is this really what the church says? Everything in there is what the church says. That
Yes.
last chapter, which answers a lot of common questions and answers in this space. What do I do with my child when they come home and they say they're transgender? What do I do with my coworker? What do I do if I'm a politician and I'm confronted with a bill that would endorse gender ideology? If I'm a priest and someone comes to me and they want to enter
Mm.
RCIA and they're transgender, how do I approach that? The whole chapter addresses those questions, but the answers for the most part are coming chapter and verse from church
Mm.
officials. It's not me,
Yes.
it's the church saying this is the path that you should follow. So those are some of the resources I would point to. The last one I wanted to mention, because identity is so important. And it's not a book about gender ideology, it's actually a book about same-sex attraction. But that's Father Michael Schmitz, the
Mm.
popular priest who does the Bible in a year and catechism in a year, wrote a book called Made for Love. And it's
It's an
about same-sex
excellent book.
attraction. outstanding, and I rely on
Very
that
personal
substantially.
too. Very personal. He wrote
It
a
is.
personal book. Yes.
Yeah, he's got a brother who came out to him as same-sex attracted.
Yeah.
But Father Michael Schmitz is so good about getting
Yeah.
the identity portion right, and that's just invaluable to Catholics in raising their kids, but also having these conversations with other people.
John Bursch, thank you so much for being here. I just reiterate, the book will be in the show links. Let's get that book out and really pass it to people. This will be a handbook that'll sit on your shelf. So if you're gonna share it with somebody, buy two so you can keep one yourself. The second thing is help us get this podcast out. I'll put it up in audio beyond all the podcast apps plus the music apps as always. Plus, I'll put it up on X in video form, and I'll put it on our website in video form so you can share that too. Last, you'll see on our website, Love Ed. Love Ed, John, if you don't mind if I do this little plug, because Love Ed
Please
is a
do.
program that we had to help parents do exactly what you're talking about. And what it does is we bring the whole family together. We bring dad with his little boy. We bring mom with with their daughter. We give them the science and the theology at the same time, everything we're talking about here. And so important, we open up the bond so that we can have a dialogue to exactly what John Bursch was just saying. Start to ask your kids questions. So we open up this dialogue between a child and their dad, a little boy and their dad, a little girl and their mom. We have the incredible that the kids will start crying sometimes. They had so many questions, so much confusion. They didn't know they could talk to dad. They didn't know they could talk to mom. And this just opens this up. So look at Love Ed. Let us know if you have any questions. And God bless you, John. Thank you so much, sir. I really appreciate you coming on. This has been very, very helpful and enlightening. We really appreciate having you.
My pleasure. God bless your ministry, which is absolutely wonderful. We need more people talking about the theology of the body. And if any of your listeners want to have a bigger dialogue about this at your church, Sophia will sell the book in bulk copies. I'm happy to come
Mm.
do a presentation and make sure that everyone in the parish has a copy of the book so that we're all catechized about these important issues.
Yes, I didn't realize that. I have a good relationship with Sophia. I might buy some myself, seriously, and in our talks, give those away. So that's an excellent idea. So thank you so much. Thanks
Thank
everyone.
you.
Thanks for
God
joining
bless.
us. We appreciate it. Bye bye.